Hi everyone, so today I'll be doing my presentation on my research topic, which is climate change in Oceania. I picked this topic because it's something that always interested me, and I just feel like climate change is a serious issue that isn't taken as seriously. So by doing the research, I can just educate myself more on it. So here are my initial research questions. The first one being, how has climate change impacted the countries of Oceania? What types of impact are oceanic countries most susceptible to? And how does geography play a role on the impact of climate change? With the first two research questions, I grouped them together because by answering the first one, I'm also kind of answering the second one. So to answer these questions, I really wanted to focus on events that were directly caused by climate change. Climate change, by definition, is the long-term change of temperature and typical weather patterns in an area. So coming into this, I had some idea of what I was going to talk about, but after doing the research, I realized that what I was thinking wasn't necessarily true. So for example, some events that I thought were results of climate change were things like ocean acidification, air and water pollution, and loss of wildlife. And while these things are linked to and are pertain to climate change, they aren't direct results of it. So now that I've established my general thinking process for this, I can go ahead and answer these questions. So for the first question, as much as I don't like to call them this, given the readings that we've done, this thing called SIDS that was coined by the United Nations, which stands for Small Island Developing States, um, are said to be the most impacted by climate change. And unfortunately, basically all of Oceania is put into this category. So given that they're islands, they don't have the same protective features that larger countries would have, like a protective coastline or their own weather and climate. So the two main types of ramifications of climate change that impact Pacific Island states the most are rising sea levels and extreme weather. So rising sea levels result from the melting of ice sheets and glaciers, and you guys all know how ice melts, but basically when air temperatures rise, the ice melts, and as ice melts, the water rises. According to Chip Fletcher, a geologist and professor at the University of Hawaii, there is not one island that hasn't or will not feel the impact of rising sea levels. The biggest result of this is this thing called disappearing islands, where they're completely submerged by water. However, a lot of things have to happen before a whole island goes underwater. And basically, rising sea levels can result in damaging infrastructure, such as building and roads, disrupting economic activity, like importing food and supplies, and it can also threaten water sources by contaminating it with salt water. An example of that shows how impactful rising sea levels is this village in Kiribati. And so over the past 40 years, the water has just been rising and coming onto land, and the villagers eventually just had to relocate because of how far the water had gotten onto land and the damages that it had caused. Um, and so back in the 70s is when they first started noticing like the water rising, and that's also when the groundwater was contaminated. Um, and yeah, so this is just one of the examples of like parts of the countries in Oceania disappearing or like being submerged underwater. And so a conservative estimate given by the UN says that sea level should rise by 1.5 feet to 3 feet by 2100. But there's a general understanding by scientists that the estimate is probably closer to 6 feet. So the next impact is extreme weather. And so extreme weather is also something that oceanic countries are susceptible to. There's a whole field in climate science research called extreme event attribution that has found evidence that links human activity with extreme weather. So, like I mentioned earlier, climate change comes from an increase in temperature, which is brought on by greenhouse emissions, aka human activity. And unfortunately, warm temperatures in air are the catalyst for a lot of extreme weather. Um, to sum it up as quickly as I can, there's this thing called the El Nino Southern Oscillation Cycle that features a warming and cooling phase, and it's naturally occurring. And things that can happen during these phases are heavy rainfall, drought, and tropical cyclones or hurricanes. Climate change doesn't play a role in the occurrence of this cycle since it naturally happens every 3 to 7 years, but it does impact the frequency, severity, and duration of the weather phenomena that happen during the cycles and how long the cycles last for. So long-term increases in air temperature can contribute to intense heat waves, droughts, and wildfires. Basically, warm air boosts evaporation, which can worsen droughts and dry out the land, and then dry fields and forests are then more prone to catching fire and producing more intense wildfire seasons. And because of the increase in evaporation, there is more moisture in the air, also known as humidity, and a warm, humid atmosphere over oceans makes for extreme hurricanes slash tropical storms or tropical cyclones and produces more rainfall. So examples of these extreme weather events would also, sorry, examples of these extreme weather events would be Tropical Cyclone Harold, which just happened in April this year, and then the 2012 floods in Fiji and the 2011 drought in Tuvalu. To briefly wrap up everything, I wanted to finish by explaining how geography plays a role in climate change as well as future impacts of climate change. So climate change is happening right now to everyone, but some are just experiencing things a little bit different than others. So, for example, in mainland America, they might feel some hotter summers and colder winters right now, but in countries like Kiribati, they're seeing whole islands disappear. And this has to do with the physical features of these countries, and unfortunately, islands just weren't really created in a way that allows them to withstand the impacts of climate change long term. Also, if we're talking about geography as a study of the Earth as home for humans, climate change can cause a lot of issues for people. Irreversible damages can push people to migrate to safer countries, which can cause overpopulation in certain areas. Other impacts would include a decrease in food and water supply from droughts and an increase in diseases due to an increase in disease-carrying insects that thrive in warm and moist environments. But yeah, so that's my presentation. Thank you for watching this all the way through, and I apologize for going over the time. There's just a lot to cover.